Does Christianity and Jesus have anything to offer us as we're going through a global pandemic like COVID-19? I think it does, and that's why I wanted to start this video series. I hope you're following along and you've watched part one of this conversation, which is really setting the background for why I wanted to start a conversation like this, which just has grown from a deep dissatisfaction with what I've seen so far online. And I really do believe that there are counterfeit forms of Christianity and religiosity that are out there that rightfully have pushed people away and just disconnect with maybe where you're at and what you've experienced, or maybe fail to address a doubt or an uncertainty you have about what Christianity can offer you during this season. I really do believe that the ways and teaching of Jesus can help you go through a global pandemic like COVID-19 with joy and hope and peace and goodness, even in the midst of potential danger, uncertainty, and financial ruin. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, you find it helpful, hopeful, and maybe even something that challenges you a little bit in some preconceived notions you have about Christianity or God, or recognize that maybe there's more to Christianity than simply believing in God and going to church, something that really could give you what you need during the season in your life. I think one of the challenges that we have with something like COVID-19 and this global pandemic is that one of the beliefs that we just inherently have as Westerners and as Americans is that when something bad or terrible happens, it's completely wasted. There's nothing good that can come from it. And this really touches with one of the core ways that Christianity can actually help you go through something like COVID-19, help communities go through something like COVID-19 in a way that's life-giving and peaceful, because what Christianity has to offer us, one of the many things, is it actually has the power to transform what you go through so that the bad things that you experience aren't wasted time. I think for many of us, the reason why we suddenly start to have a spiritual awakening during great times of uncertainty is because consumerism and the opportunity to just entertain ourselves to death allows us to numb this deep hunger that we have inside of us. And so in moments like we're having right now with the global pandemic, it has the way of pushing out the things in our life that numb our soul and numb our inner life to the point where we start to become reawakened to this inner hunger that we have to be in touch with the divine, to be in touch with something that's bigger than us, to be in touch with something that our soul deeply longs for. It's in contexts like this that Christianity was originally speaking to and writing to its audiences. In fact, the theologian and writer Saul of Tarsus, who later became better known as the Apostle Paul, wrote a letter to Christians in the center of the Roman Empire, Rome itself. Christians who were dealing with uncertainty and fear and frustration, who were losing their jobs and losing their safety and were being pushed to the margins of society. And as he was writing to them, he was talking about the suffering and the pain that they're going through. And he said some pretty profound things. I want to read it to you. That we know this, that God works for the good of all of those who love him. What he's trying to help them understand is that if you're a Christian, one of the things that we believe is that God is capable of redeeming and transforming every piece of suffering that we go through. Now, this doesn't mean that suffering is good. No, suffering is still bad. But God has the ability to transform and take the bad things in our life, the bad pain and suffering and fear and anxiety and uncertainty, and he can use it to be a blessing to you and be a blessing to me. That suffering is not something that's wasted time. That uncertainty and fear is not something that is unfortunate and should be avoided at all costs. It's something that God can actually use and transform for your good. And then talking about how God is capable of doing this a little bit later in that same letter, he said something incredibly profound. I want to read it to you. Who then shall separate us from the love and presence of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or the sword? Nothing. And this is what's fascinating. What the Apostle Paul is saying here is these things will be present in the life of Christians. These things can be present in the life of Christians. And yet you can have the type of experience where as you're walking through those things, you can feel and experience and know the love and presence of God in your life during that time. And that just seems maybe trite to you. It seems almost impossible. How could that possibly be the case? Well, when Christianity is rightly practiced and understood, this is something that you can experience. This is why some people have known Christians to go through terrible, hard things, and in the midst of those hard things, they are living from and operating up from a position of joy and goodness. And so the first real benefit that Christianity has to offer the world during a season like a global pandemic like COVID-19 is the ability to use the hard, terrible things in our life and in the life of those of the people we love to be used for our good. The bad things can be transformed for good. They are not completely lost. Now, I recognize this doesn't solve all of your tensions and all of your doubts, but the very first thing, the bedrock and foundation of the things that we need to understand as we continue this conversation is that the bad things you are going for can be transformed and redeemed and used for your good. And even though they're bad, and even though they're not something that God wants for you, He can use it for your good and for your benefit. But how could these bad things be used for good? And the Apostle Paul actually is kind of almost understanding that this is naturally where our mind and our heart goes when talking about God's ability to be in control and transform bad things for our good. He talks about this idea of almost living in light of the future. He talks about that, he says it in this way. He says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed to us. Now, this is what he's getting at. He's saying that when we correctly understand the future and what's coming, it actually has the power to reach back into our present and give us strength and courage and joy. I want you to imagine with me thinking about your favorite sports team if you have a sports team. I recognize not everyone is big into sports, but just imagine with me your favorite football team. And in your favorite football team, your team is down in the first few quarters like by double digits. It looks ugly. It looks terrible. Like there's no way your team's coming back. And so recognizing that, why waste your time engaging with the suffering that comes with watching your team get crushed? You turn it off and you're browsing through Twitter later that day. And what you find out is that there actually is a comeback that happens in the fourth quarter and your team, out of all improbability, comes back and wins. Now imagine with me that you go back and rewatch and experience that football game, knowing what is coming. You know the outcome. And so in the midst of your team getting crushed, instead of despair, instead of frustration, instead of hurt, instead of just wanting to pull your hair out and scream at the TV, you actually have anticipation. You have excitement knowing, oh my gosh, how is my team going to come back? I know they're going to win. I know the final score. And so instead of your team being crushed and it being depressing, there's actually a thrilling excitement that comes because you know what the outcome is. And so it allows you to re-experience what you're walking through. That's what the Apostle Paul is saying. In fact, C.S. Lewis, who is a great Christian writer, talked about this truth and talking about suffering and talking about the heartache that comes to the world, that there is the way that heaven has a way of, once realized, reaching back into our past and our experience and breathing new life and new experience into that. He's talking about the same thing the Apostle Paul is talking about. So if you want to experience what Christianity has to offer, you first have to understand and really believe in the resurrection. And this is what's uniquely powerful about Christianity, is the resurrection is foundational to what it means to be a Christian, that we're not living for our best life now. In fact, it frees us up to live generously and courageously because we recognize that we're living with the end in mind and we know what the final score is. Now, I recognize that's not proof that Christianity is true, but if Christianity is true, this reveals and shows to us how Christianity uniquely has something to offer to us to help us go through the COVID-19 pandemic with joy, with hope, with peace, and with confidence. Now, I get that the next challenge that comes with Christianity in this is just the belief and the understanding that God actually created a world and that He allowed there to be suffering in it. And He's asking us to go through it rather than just snapping His finger and doing away with all that suffering. And I recognize that the problem of suffering is a problem for Christians and for Christianity. I get that. But I also want to propose that simply doing away with Christianity or doing away with religion in no way solves the dilemma. You can be irreligious and still deeply long for and push against and wish that this suffering wouldn't be the case. And so irreligion isn't the solution to the tension that you're experiencing. And this is actually why I think Christianity offers us something unique when it comes to the problem of suffering. Yes, that there is suffering in the world. Yes, I don't know why God is allowing it to happen, especially during a time like this where COVID-19 is destroying economies and destroying people's lives and literally leading people to death. But this is what I do know about Christianity, is that Jesus, while He has allowed the world to be this way, He is in no way immune to this suffering. In fact, that is the whole point of what Christians call the incarnation, that God became man. He became Jesus, and He came and lived a life. He died on the cross. He was crucified, one of the most horrific, suffering-induced experiences that any human being could experience. And in doing so, it says in the book of Hebrews that for the joy set before Him, Jesus endured the cross, scorning its shame, so He could look forward to engaging with and saving and helping people like you and me get to know and connect with and experience God. which means that Jesus is not asking anything of you or me that he hasn't already done, that he went through suffering and allowed it to be redeemed for your benefit and my benefit. And so in doing so, he lived through it, he walked through it, and he's saying, look, I found the way through suffering. Come follow me in my ways, and I can transform your suffering from just being something that's bad that's happened in your life that should be avoided to something that he can transform and use for your good. And I recognize that there's more that we could talk about, but the foundation of this conversation comes down to the fact that Jesus can transform what's bad for your good. It doesn't make what's bad good. The bad is still bad, but he can use what's bad. There is no unwasted bad in God's economy, that he can use those things for your good. I hope you continue to engage with us during this conversation. If you have questions or pushback, I would love to engage with you, especially if you're someone where you don't necessarily believe in Christianity. You don't believe this is true. I'm so thankful that you would spend time thinking about this and engaging with it. And I would love to interact with you. You can email me at questions@postchristian.cc. I'm also working on creating a blog platform that we can interact with, but I would love your interaction, love your questions, love to hear back from you so that I can really engage with where people are at. Because if Christianity is really true, we should be able to lean into what's true and not be afraid of questions and critique and pushback. And I think what we'll find through this process is that Christianity is not something that you or I should simply write off because we're going through something challenging. That maybe, in fact, there is a longing inside of you that is awakened during a time like this that Jesus wants to satisfy. And I hope you find that to be the case. Email me with questions, post your comments below. I'd love to interact with you. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon in the next installment.